Kim.
Hi, this is Shauna.
Hi, this is Kay. This is Thriving LDS Singles Sisters Podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the LDS Thriving Singles Podcast. We have Kay and Shauna and Kim. Hello. And we get to interview Kay today. I am going to give you her bio first, and then we'll get to hear more about her. All right. Kay lives in Australia with her pet kangaroo and fights off crocodiles and snakes daily. Well,
That's true.
Really, that's a whoops. Actually, only the first bit is true. She lives in the beautiful country of Australia in suburban Brisbane with her dog, although she does occasionally see a kangaroo on the golf course opposite her home. She's a life coach with 12 years experience helping women to live their best life. She specializes in helping women to make more money in their business, improve their relationships with others, and most especially with themselves. She has a long list of qualifications, including a Bachelor of Arts with a major in psychology and a graduate diploma in counseling. She is a certified clinical EFT practitioner, a qualified naturopath, and personal trainer. Her career has encompassed owning a very successful health food shop, counseling step families, running a bookkeeping franchise, a real estate business, a personal training business, and owning a property development company, which is now run by her oldest son. In her retirement, she now combines all those qualifications and experiences as a life coach to help others achieve success however they describe success. She has been married twice, the first ending in divorce, and the second with the death of her husband 5 years ago. She is the mother of 8 children and raised 4 stepsons from her first marriage and has 3 stepdaughters from her second marriage. Currently, she has 14 grandchildren and counting. She loves to travel, and you never know where she might be as she travels around Australia in her motorhome and combines that with some overseas trips too. Kay joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a 16-year-old, very much against her family's wishes. She is now a strong and active member, although she has had periods of inactivity, especially after her divorce from her temple marriage, and has traveled the path from excommunication to coming to know God as her loving Heavenly Father and Jesus as her Savior. Her personal experiences give her a width and depth of understanding, as well as compassion and love that she brings to her coaching business. She understands the ups and downs of life's journey, and combined with her qualifications, she can help you navigate your life so you can achieve a life full of joy no matter what. That is awesome, Kay. That is such a beautiful, lovely introduction. And I feel so blessed to get to be with both of you and spend time with you and learn and be mentored by you, because you are both very amazing. But that is...
It might have almost been faster to say what she hasn't done, because she is a jack of all trades.
Yeah, and clearly an entrepreneur. So that is awesome.
So fun to hear about.
So, Kay, tell us a little bit more. Give us more information about you.
So I was born in Australia and lived a very typical life up until I was about 12. With, my mum and dad, and I've got 2 younger brothers who I used to beat up regularly, mind you. But and then at 12, my father went overseas to Canada. We all went over as a family. So I got to spend most of my teenage life in Canada, and we started right up the very top of Canada, right near the Arctic Circle. So massive, massive life change from boiling hot to freezing cold. It was a very interesting experience. I loved my time in Canada. My parents didn't cope very well. And by the time I was 13, my mother was not coping at all and proceeded to go into depression and alcoholism and really fell in a big heap, which made my life very difficult. And yeah, it was a really tough time. Finding the church at 16, which is a lovely story that, tell one day, but it literally fell into it. And it was a great turning point. And I think finding it early meant that, you're on a path, and you could go that way into sort of drugs and alcohol and sex and all that, or you can go the way the church taught. And I didn't really probably grasp the gospel fully, but it answered some questions I'd always had about things like, who is God? I struggled with understanding that. And I think the missionaries used to teach God's like your father, he's all loving. My parents weren't all loving. And especially by this stage, basically they had deserted us children completely, both of them. And so that sort of a concept of a loving God took a long time to understand. And I think I probably didn't really get it until I was well in my 40s. And I think that comes from, if you didn't grow up feeling loved, then how can you understand love? Because it just doesn't make sense. And so I've been on a real life journey of self-development and learning about loving yourself. And I think running into the EFT was probably a really big turning point, because I was able to release some of those blocks from childhood and sort of it just like, I get it. And it was I can actually still remember that feeling. It was magic. But yeah, so I joined the church. I joined in a youth ward, which was absolutely hilarious fun. But then I decided to come back to Australia to go to university. And the church in Australia was tiny. And I hadn't understood that. And it made life very difficult. But that was, some stories in there. But I got married at 19 to a man who was 16 years older than me and already had 4 children. And by that stage, I had 1 child as well. So we started life with 5 children, which is probably not ideal.
Yeah.
But we did pretty good. And he was a member of the church, and we were the good church couple, and we did all of the right things. But the basis wasn't really there in both our faith and our love of each other. Like, you can't love someone else until you've learnt to love yourself. And I hadn't learnt that, and he hadn't learnt that. And so it all fell apart after about 16 years. And yeah, I've sort of blamed the church as well as him and everybody else. Stuff you all.
Yeah.
And so I lived in the wilderness for a while. Actually, can't say it was all bad. And while there, I met my next husband, who wasn't a member of the church, and we fell in love, and it was wonderful. And we got married, and he already had 3 children. And we thought it would be a wonderful idea to have some more children, which is so yours, mine, and our family. So I, at this stage, had 6 children. He had 3. And over the next few years, we proceeded to have 2 more. I think the goal had been 1, but we got 2, which was absolutely delightful. And we had a really lovely 26 years together. And yes, then he got cancer. Definitely not in his plan, and certainly not in my plan. And that has been a really difficult journey. I don't know how, I don't know. Yeah, grief is hard. Grief is really hard. When you get divorced, I guess there's some people who get divorced unwillingly, and didn't realise that the marriage was falling to bits. But for most people, divorce is a bit of a, whew, thank goodness. And whereas death, you've still got your plans, you've still got your dreams, you've still got the hopes. He worked very, very hard to get us into a very good financial position. And he never got to enjoy the fruits of his labour, which was really hard. So, yeah, I've spent the last 5 years sort of just trying to recover from that. And it certainly takes longer than you'd expect. a lot longer than I expected. I thought I was pretty cool, pretty capable, pretty knowledgeable, but it certainly took its time. And so, yes, so theoretically I retired, and then I went, I can't retire. I've got to work. I can't just sit home, and I love reading books, but you can't do it all the time. And so I've come back to be a life coach, and it's great. I love it. So I was working on that before he got sick, and then sort of took some time off, and then I've come back.
That's amazing.
So,
Yeah. So I have so many questions now from that story.
Good.
I guess so you were a single mom when you started out your adult life as a single mom. So that had to be challenging.
Yep, I had my first baby. I was just 18. I had my first baby, and yes, this was in 1974. Being a single mom and keeping your child was very, very unusual.
And you were going to church at the time, because how did you meet your first husband?
At church. So about a year later. Yeah. So, and yes, being like having a baby while you're still going to church is not seen as the right thing to do. And there were certainly members who were very judgmental and very critical. And I remember for the last few months of the pregnancy, I lived with a family who took me in and looked after me. And they got criticised fairly badly by other members, because they were saying, oh, look, what's she doing to you? You know, your children. Her children were quite young, like 6, 4 and 3, I think, something like that. And they said, well, what are you teaching your child? And her comeback was, I'm teaching them how to love other people.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah,
and she did.
She was for those angels in our lives, right?
Yes. And I have been blessed with, various angels all the way along, various different people. And she was certainly one of them. She was absolutely life-saving at the time. So, yes, the bishop of that ward did not like me in his ward and told me to leave.
Oh.
And so I moved. They moved to a different city called Adelaide. I followed a little bit later and moved to the city they were in, and met this single man who had been divorced and then joined the church. He actually was one of those people who the missionaries knocked on his door. So he'd been a member about 4 years, and we got together fairly quickly, and everybody thought it was a wonderful match. It was perfect.
Except you were 19 by then, and you had an instant 5 children.
That's it. And I thought I was going to do a fantastic job. I was going to be the best mother they've ever had, because I knew how to do this, and like naive. Like, good naivety, but it's definitely naive. Those boys still actually love me, which is really nice to know. So I didn't do too bad a job. But
we do that. Like when I was 35 and still thought I'm going to be amazing. So it didn't matter if you're 19 or 35.
These boys hadn't had a mother. Their mother had literally dumped them, and so they hadn't had a mother for 5 years. And so I thought I would just come in and I would cook meals and clean and look after them, and I'll just be wonderful.
Yeah.
But of course, they had very much developed their own lifestyle and are actually doing quite a good job. And one of my first recommendations to people entering a step family is don't change anything. If it's functioning, don't change anything.
Well, you had said growing up, you didn't feel that love. You didn't have a loving mom and dad. So it always impresses me when someone becomes something that they didn't even like. How did you learn that? Because you weren't raised that way.
No, and as I've learned more and more about this, I realized that I knew very little about love, but I thought I did. But I was blessed with a inquisitive mind. I think that's the biggest blessing that I was born with. And the ability to go find information. So when I had my son and I realized, the first time he cried and I didn't know what to do, that I had to go learn. And yeah, when I look back how I raised that poor child, I'm surprised he survived. And he's actually a really nice guy. So, we bumbled along really well. But yes, I certainly raised number 8 very differently than I raised number 1. and I mean, yes, she had a very different upbringing than they did. Because I learned a lot. And it would be wonderful to grow up in a family where that was all shown to you as you're growing up. But yeah, that's certainly not what I got. So I learnt it. My degree in child rearing, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really like what you said about, so even you're right, at least from my experience, and Shauna, for sure, probably with yours, even though divorce is really hard and painful, there is this feeling of relief. Like, I mean, you are going through a mourning process, mourning the loss of a concept and what you thought your life would be kind of thing. But you also are feeling like, oh, I can breathe. Everything's going to be okay, right? But when you lose the person that you love, when you lose somebody in death, I can't even imagine how different that is. I'd love to hear more about kind of the contrast between your two experiences. And
yes, well, my divorce was the same. It was like, phew, I can actually remember the day he left the house, and you're splitting up the furniture, and he's like, you can have all the bedroom furniture, you can have this, like really just getting rid of him out of the house. Like, I was like, goodbye.
It's literally like 1,000 pounds off your back. I mean, when they say that saying, I never got it until I got it.
Yeah. So, that was, whereas this was like, I don't even know how to compare it. You didn't want them to go, so and he didn't want to go. He was a very fit, healthy, active guy who had really grabbed life with everything. And so even when the doctor said something like, 2 to 3 years, and he went, oh, that's not good enough. And so when people would ask him, he would say, oh, no, I've been given 10 or 20 years. And you're going, that?
Being optimistic. How long was it?
It was 2.5 years.
Oh,
wow.
The doctor was actually spot on. But he just refused to admit that. And so we lived our lives as if it wasn't happening. And it's not just the death, it's that watching someone die, I guess, getting sicker and sicker. And you can't talk to them about it, and you can't help them. And yeah, I reckon it took a couple of years to get over the post-traumatic stress of, like, I remember having to drive to the hospital and getting so exhausted out of sheer stress, I guess, that I would like have to pull over and go to sleep in the car for a bit because I couldn't drive to the hospital to see him in that state. And so, and then, with divorce, the person's still around. So when you're sorting out your finances or something, you've actually still got them to, like, well, here, you have this, and the court will sort out the property or whatever. But the death, the person's gone. And so there's no one to discuss all that stuff with. It's just you. And you're going, oh, what was your password for that? And how did that work? And we actually had it's a funny little story. It's a very sad story, but it's a funny little story because he's in hospital in the very last days of his life. And he kept working most of the time. Even he was having chemotherapy and working. Like, it was, definitely had some workaholic tendencies. And a couple of my children and I were standing around him talking, in the last couple of days. He's pretty much unconscious. And his phone rings. And we all sort of look at this phone ringing and going, oh, and it's a work call. And you're going, what are we going to do with this? And so my son answered it, and then we realized we needed to change the message on the phone, that he was going to keep getting his phone calls. He had to be able to open the phone. And in those days, it was a fingerprint. And so we literally pick up this unconscious man's finger to put on his phone, to open his phone, to then cancel his password so that we could keep operating and change the message on the phone. So, but yeah, that's the problem, is that like all of life is still going, and you're not sitting there splitting it up as you do in divorce. And so you have to go to banks, and I had to take a death certificate in to get the pet insurance changed into my name. You know,
Right.
That's a whole different process. And how long has that been, Kay? How long ago did he pass away?
5 years. 5 years. Yeah. And so it's that no one ever warned you about the amount of paperwork afterwards. Like that, and lots of people talk about that. The paperwork, it's just enormous. I made a couple of mistakes. One is cancelling his phone, and the other was cancelling the post office box. Because I figured, we weren't working anymore, so we didn't need those things. So when you phone up to change the phone, they will say, oh, we'll send the little message to the phone number. And so it's been a nightmare.
Yeah.
Nightmare.
Whereas at least if the person's still alive, you can go to them and say, here, sign this piece of paper. You might want to talk to them, but you can at least
Yeah.
you can go to them and say,
I remember because my husband was in prison, trying to file my taxes. And I was still married to him, and we had to do that like it was impossible. So at least I could go check it into the jail and do all that, but you couldn't do that.
Yeah, I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
You had to have an accountant. You've got to have a team around you that supports you. You've got to have
one you can trust.
One you can trust.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, you're still in the grieving process, because I remember in those
doing all this while you're grieving and thinking, I don't want him to be dead anyway.
you don't even want to get out of bed, let alone. Yeah.
And I certainly didn't operate very well in that first year. I certainly would rather have I watched TV and stayed in bed, and of course the extra sad bit to the story is that our youngest child was still in high school. And so she was just finishing off her year 12. So that last year of his life where he was really ill, she was trying to do year 12 at school. And he died just before she finished school.
Aww.
How did she adjust? Was that a hard adjustment for her?
It's been a very hard time. It's been very, very difficult. And of course, at that age, at 17, 18, you don't know anybody else in that position. None of your friends understand. Like no one gets it. So yeah, she's done some counselling, and she's coming all right now too, but it's taken time. It's really taken time. And that advice people give, don't make any big decisions in the first year, 100%. Don't make any big decisions. Every now and again you hear someone who got married in that first year. I couldn't get out of bed. Like, how could you get married?
It's hard for you to have to be the mother and grieve and try to counsel your child. I mean, I had a hard time because I was struggling, and I didn't do very good at that.
I didn't do very good at all. And what I ended up doing, so remember, by this time she's 18 heading on to 19, so it's not like a child, but I actually told her that we needed to separate, like she couldn't live at home. That it was like we were feeding each other's depression.
Right. Almost like you've seen people when they've lost a young child, the wife and the husband, a lot of times they divorce because it's so hard to have all that sadness between you.
That's right. And so I bought a motorhome, and she went and lived in an apartment and went to uni. And so it actually was very good for both of us. But that was after that first year. Like, that first year we just sat in our beds and sat depressed, basically.
Wow.
God. Sorry.
Yeah, that's so sad to go through. Did you, and he wasn't a member, you said, right?
No.
Through that time, did you rely on the church, or were you active? Or tell us about that side of things.
Yeah, I was actually really active by then. So I came back to church when the last two children were like babies, the children. And it's I don't want to take all the time telling the story, but yeah, I came back to church and had been coming, and he was quite supportive of that. He liked the church in its, so especially as the girls entered their teens, he's liked having the teenage youth program for the girls and things, but he was not interested in it for himself and didn't believe there was a God and didn't believe in the afterlife. And so that made his,
I bet he's really surprised now, Kay.
I do again.
Told you. Have you done his work, or have you considered doing his work, or are you just thinking about that? Or not?
One of my emotions, so on top of depression, I was very angry with him. I had a lot of anger.
Yeah, true.
Anger that he died, even though it was cancer, and so obviously not. I don't know how you cope when it's suicide or something, because the amount of anger I had when it wasn't actually his choice was enormous.
It's surprising how often you hear that. Someone's like, I was mad at him. I'm like, he was in a car wreck. But they are mad.
Yeah.
I was really mad because he had died, and he had promised me when we decided to have these, well, we decided to have one. We got two, but we decided to have one child. And because I'd been, I felt like I'd been a single mother a number of times in my life. I'm like, I don't want to do that again. My first husband was not very active with his children. He was an active church member, but he wasn't really with his children. And I felt, and then of course we separated and I had the kids, and so I was a single mum. And I don't want to do that again. You've got to really help. And he promised to be there. And so to die when she was not even, when she just 18 was just sort of like, you promised, you said you'd be here to help. The other one wasn't, she was only 20. So it was like, you're supposed to be helping. So there was a lot of anger, and then the church stuff just added to it of like, well, stuff you, I'm not getting you baptized because like you wouldn't do it in life, so I'm not doing it now. You had all the opportunities. Yeah. So I'm not suggesting that it's actually the right attitude or a good attitude, but it was definitely my attitude. And then
it sounds like a normal reaction.
Yeah, I don't think it was too unhealthy. It just was not the most loving thing.
I mean, none of us really think, oh, how would I, you think, oh, that'd be so sad, but you don't think about like afterwards, how you're going to feel, what you're going to do.
Yeah, because you've been left, and you're left with all of these problems. You're left with two children who are basically teenagers, who are just, going through those really crucial sort of later teens. He left me with a job, for instance. He told both of them that he would buy them a car when they turned 21. And it's like, he was the car guy. His original job had been, he was the chief engineer of Holden in Australia. He was like a car guy. And so I'd never paid any attention to cars. And suddenly this older child was turning 21, and he promised her a car. It's like, we chose the car because it had Apple AirPlay.
Yeah, exactly. I like that color.
But like it was, that's the anger. It's like, you're supposed to be here doing this. What am I doing looking for a car? And when she turned 21 and I said, like, let's go car shopping, she just burst into tears. She said, Dad's supposed to be doing this with me. And I agree. It's like,
so sad.
So all sorts of stuff, that ramifications. And of course, they're going through this grief of like, Dad's not going to be there. He's not there for school graduation. He wasn't there for uni graduation. He's not there for all of the things. And he'd actually been an extremely good dad with these two kids. Like he had done a really good job.
So how are you handling that now? How are you talking to them when that comes up?
The older one is fine. She's coping quite well. The younger one, she doesn't want me to put things on Facebook. Like it was our wedding anniversary yesterday. So it would have been, we'd been married 28 years yesterday.
And that's still just as too hurtful?
Too hurtful. She doesn't want me to put stuff on Facebook. So,
Still struggling.
Still struggling. Yeah. So it's really hurt her deeply.
It's really interesting to hear this side of it, because when it was me, I kept thinking, it'd be so much better if he had just died, so my kids didn't feel this, how they felt, whatever it is. But on the flip side, they feel something different, but it's the same result. You all feel that.
Yeah.
Loss and grieving.
The loss. They're not
Or
there.
betrayal. Betrayal.
And nothing's going to make, and you felt betrayal because he died. So it's all the same kind of grieving. It's, different, but the same feeling, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. It's different, but the same. It's grief. It's grief. It's grief for the dreams. It's grief for the plans. It's grief for that childhood picture they had, the childhood picture that they had of Dad walking them down the aisle, of Dad this Dad, it's gone. And so it's grief, and grief takes many forms. And anger was the big one on mine. And then
how have you worked through the anger now? Like what have you done as far as, or are you still angry? I mean, that's okay too.
I've way nowhere near as angry. There's still moments of it, but it's nowhere near. But the EFT was a major. I hired my own coach, even when he got sick and he wanted to follow the doctor's plan. And the first time he had chemotherapy, he got very, very ill. So I was mad at him, just like he wouldn't try other things. And so, I had to go and talk to someone else, which was a really good, so I used the EFT to get rid of all of that anger, which meant that I was able to support him, because I came to the understanding that I think I know lots of stuff, but how do I really know? Like, I don't really know what would work. And it's his life and his body, his choice. And so I had to come to that understanding to be able to support him in the decisions he was making, because after all, that's it, isn't it? It's his body, his choices. Just because I think I know better doesn't mean I really do. Although I still think I know a few things he should have done.
And they probably were better, Kay.
They probably were better. Yeah.
It's hard to make decisions during that time, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, no, this is better, and it's just like no easy road.
No.
Yeah.
And that's how we run our marriage. So even though I was now an active member of the church when we were most of our marriage, and he wasn't, we ran our marriage on the grounds of like, your beliefs are valid and your beliefs are valid. Like, respect and that, because we actually had the same values, even though we had this different belief system, and the values of looking after the children and the family. We had those values in common. And so some people are doing that by taking their kids out to lunch on Sunday, and some people are taking them to church on Sunday. Both of them are doing it to love their children.
Yeah, I love hearing that, because we definitely have to do a whole episode on Do you date somebody not in the church? Or, what's the whole process around loving somebody that doesn't have the same beliefs, but same values? And I think you're right. Having respect is such a significant part of that. Respect and similar value system helps give you a good, healthy marriage.
Yes.
While there may still be some significant differences in what you believe.
Significant differences.
Yeah, to be LDS and to not believe in God are as opposite as you can get in a belief system.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I would have that conversation with him. I was like, well, if you're right and I'm wrong, well, we won't know. But if I'm right and you're wrong, guess what?
We're going to know.
We're going to know. So I can't wait to say I told you so.
I know.
It really is the first thing I will say to him, I think.
I told you so. And get over here and punch you in the face.
Yeah, that's right. It's like you could have made our life so much easier. But
if you just lived.
That's right. So he fully expected to live that long, and everybody else would have expected him to.
Yeah.
Like, there was no reason why he wouldn't have.
Yeah.
So
there's no guarantees for tomorrow, are there? There's just really not.
No, that's right. You can do everything right and still, at your time, it's up.
A friend in my neighborhood who went on this last trip with us last year was diagnosed with cancer, and they didn't think she was going to make it another year. But she said it changed the way she lives completely. She says, I live like I don't have a tomorrow now. And they were from Australia. Shauna, I was like, Kay's with me today.
Yeah, we love Kay's accent.
I know, I love it so much. You guys figured you had forever, right?
Yeah.
And because he wasn't willing to admit that the cancer was going to get him, he never did that. He just kept working and living like he was going to live for another 30 years.
I almost feel like that's better than laying in your bed waiting for the day you're going to die, but you don't know, right?
Yeah, well, no, there's certainly lying in your bed's not a very good action either. But yeah, we did one trip overseas, but yeah, I don't know. It would have been, I think if he accepted that it was 2.5 years, we could have planned the 2.5 years.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Lived it instead of sitting home worrying what day. You would have gone out and lived that 2.5 years.
Yeah,
I agree.
And I guess he was doing the right thing by me in that he wanted to make sure that I was financially, because as I said, we had a building development company. And so he wanted to finish off the projects that he had happening. Oh, and we had to hand over the company to my son. So he did that. It was one of the things he did do. And that succession planning is really important. And so
it's
from the
so responsible. I mean, really.
Yeah.
That's
such
a great
loving
man.
act, a really loving act to do that.
Uh-huh.
Yes. And so it meant that the company didn't really miss a beat. Brennan, my son, he did. He's so even the older children who were his stepchildren are grieving, because like for Brennan, it was his best friend. Like Brennan was 17 when we got married. So not really a father anymore, but he was his best friend. And we ended up having this company, and he was one of the big keys in the company. And so he was the mentor, and yeah, they were best friends. And so Brennan's ended up grieving. And the other children, because he was their stepdad, and a number of them said that they were closer to him than they were to their real dad, to their biological dad. And they grieved as if they'd lost their dad. The boys in particular, they're missing their best friend. They're missing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, a dad's one thing, but a dad and a best friend, that's hard.
Because they were all adults now.
That's a big.
All adults.
So tell us, about now and how you've adjusted so far and what's going on with you now.
Well, I feel like I've come through it, which is a nice feeling. It's a really nice feeling. And I'm starting to okay, what do I want? And that's an interesting phase as well, because we owned a house together and we owned a business together. And so we had all these things. And of course, the decisions are, what do I want? Spent most of my life raising children. Well, literally all my life from 18 till now. Literally.
Yeah, just like 2 days ago, because you spent time raising your little granddaughter for a couple of years too.
That's right. So the last 2 years I've spent raising a granddaughter as well. So yes, that's only literally finished 2 days ago. So I have spent my whole life raising children, and now I've got to reinvent who I am, and so in that after that first year, I decided to not keep the family home. The children weren't overly impressed with that decision, but it was like too many memories. I felt like I was rattling around in Memoryville, The children would come, because my children are all adults and busy and raising their children. And so most of the time I was in this house by myself. And so, I made the big decision to sell it and bought a motorhome and traveled around. And so that was pretty radical for everybody, including me. And I've bought a townhouse, which is, there's no way he would ever have lived in a townhouse. He would not have ever made that decision. But it's like, well, you're not here. So
and I'm still mad at you.
And I'm still mad at you. And I get to spend your money. So there.
Hey, I wish I would have been there. I would have come over and made that house yours. You wouldn't even know he was ever there.
Yeah, Shauna's really good at that.
Does this bring you joy?
Well, the house didn't bring me joy. Maybe because I was angry, I didn't want them. I just
right.
I want it all gone. And it's
that's I love how much he was loved, Kay. It's really, I hope someone loves me that much.
Yes.
I mean, he was loved.
He was loved.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of his when he was wearing casual clothes, he really liked the Hawaiian shirts, the very colourful shirts.
Yeah.
And he had a wardrobe full of those on top of his proper shirts. And so for his funeral, all of the children wore one of his shirts.
Oh,
awesome. That is awesome.
So they all got one of his shirts. And he had a lot of different hats. So they all we want one of his hats. I was like, okay, have one of his hats. So,
that's neat. It's really neat. It's really a tribute to him.
Absolutely. He did an amazing job as a stepdad. That was a brilliant job.
My kids would be, don't wear that. That's the thing she yelled at me in. That.
Yeah, I'm not even going to go down that road with my kids. I'm not even going to think about it.
No, we got married when the kids were I guess by the time we actually got married, because we were very good and lived together for a couple of years. But they were sort of 9 to 17, that sort of ages, so relatively young still. We very early on we started having step family issues. Because I had a bunch of kids and he was like this person by himself. And
we're not near as amazing as we thought we were, are we, Kay?
And no, it was much harder than it looks. No, and we went to counselling and we found a step family association, and we became heavily involved in that. And we did their course, which was probably a marriage saver for us. So so we did that, and so that sort of started our life down the step family coaching line, and we became part of that association, and we did some coaching together with other step families. And it's amazing how many have similar issues.
So much.
Yeah, a whole other podcast for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots in
Another
that
10 podcasts. If
Yeah, 10
if we're
podcasts instead.
honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really fun. But he did it. So 26 years later, he was the loved stepfather.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mm.
So, Kate, what would you say for the single sisters, whether they were divorced or have combined families or have been widowed? Like, what would be your main things you would want to share with them, or things that you feel are important?
Okay, well, I'm going to write about 10 books on the topic, I think.
Yeah.
It's like, I think one of the things I've learned is that life looks really crappy. And it often, for most of my life, life's looked really crappy. And yet now I look back, I can see that God was there. And at the time, you certainly wouldn't have been able to say that. So even the example of, so he's going through this last couple of years of his life, and he was very, very ill. I was actually the gospel doctrine teacher through that time. And I think that was the best calling I could have had. Because what it meant was that I was studying my scriptures in depth.
Yeah.
And that supported me.
Yeah.
And so that was like, and I got released like 3 months after he died or something. It's like, no, don't take it from me now. I still need it. And it was probably the thing that sustained me the most.
Yeah, when it's 4 years, it's not like, oh, let's just call her. God was in the background working for you like he does all of us.
Yes. And so you, at the time you just think, oh, well, they just called me. But when you look back and go, God knew that was the thing that was going to help me.
Yes.
So that's sort of, God's there for you even when it doesn't look like it. And even when things are crappy.
Yeah.
The other one is, don't let members upset you. Like, the church, the gospel is true, and people said stupid stuff to me, absolutely stupid stuff. My little girl was at church with me one day, and someone after sacrament meeting said to me, I'm praying for your husband. I'm sure he's going to get better. And I was obviously feeling pretty down, and I went, no, he's not. My little girl, but she's 16 or 17, you can't say that to someone. And I went, stuff it. Yes, I can.
Aww.
I think that it's really hard for people. Like when people have someone pass away, I almost felt like I would try to sneak around the other way because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. And so my sister, who had a child die, on the other hand, said to me, people are trying to avoid me. And so you see, we can't win on either side, I'm afraid, because we're going to say, we don't know. But because I was saying this, I thought it's because my sister said, don't avoid them. So then I got a book to see what you should say. There's just nothing someone can say to you that is going to be right.
Yeah.
So I think
we should do another podcast on that one, but it's, the mourn with people who are mourning. That's so the person who did it the very best, the night before the funeral, she phoned me up and said, like, let's go for a walk. And we just walked along the beachfront and just sat on a seat. She didn't say anything or do anything.
Yeah, that's the tough one.
She literally mourned with someone who was mourning.
Awesome.
She was also the person the week after who phoned and said, are you coming to church today? And I went, no, I don't think I can. And she said, I will meet you in the car park. Like, she's not like, oh, find me in the chapel. No, I'll meet you in the car park.
Okay, those are two great advices, because I would never have thought of either of those. just
No,
to walk and say nothing because I think I need to make you feel better.
You can't.
Right.
You can't let me cry.
Yeah.
And that's what she did. She let me cry. The day after he died, she brought round a fruit bowl. You know, people bringing chocolates and stuff. No, she brought a fruit bowl. You know? So just stuff like that. She was probably she did it the best of everybody. And yeah.
Wait, the fruit bowl was better than the chocolates? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I didn't feel like eating, and I had a house full of.
I am not a good friend when someone passes away.
Well, we can teach you. It's okay.
Yeah.
So glad.
Not.
Yeah. No, you don't, because you don't.
I know.
Shauna, we would bring you fruity pebbles.
Thank you. That's exactly what I would need.
Well, and that's the other thing, of course, know the person. Like,
Yeah.
And so the other thing that I would tell church members, please do your visiting teaching and your home teaching. Like, please do those jobs, because if you're doing them properly, then the person's being supported through this time. And so you know what they need because you know them.
We're all doing what we think we would want. We don't know. You got to give us all the benefit of the doubt and say, I mean, we're just humans.
Yeah. And grief is something that unless you've experienced it, you don't know it. You can imagine it, but you don't understand it. And that's the other thing that I think in the church, we talk a lot about families and marriage and all of that. If you haven't been single, you do not understand what it's like in the church as a single person. Don't try and tell me that it's the same. It's not. It's a very different experience.
Yeah.
And every ward has 100 single people in it. And every time I tell people that, they are shocked. And then you go through a ward list and you like, because I read that article from that lady the other day. She said something like, when people become single, only something like 15% stay active.
That's how I chose my husband, because he stayed active.
Yeah, it's a terrible statistic. And it is. It's because it's a different experience being single in the church.
I believe that would be true in any church, really.
Oh, yeah. I think in any church, yes.
It's just like it's hard to be around a bunch of couples when you're single.
Yeah.
And even if they're not thinking something, you're not, I don't belong here. It's hard.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, any other last words, or do you feel like you've shared what you would want?
I think I've got many words to say, and so stay tuned.
Many more podcasts to do. I know, because I have a lot of questions I still want to ask, but they are like whole podcast topics.
Okay. So just know that God does love you, even if you look at your life and think, how on earth is this God loving me?
And he's there. He's in the background.
He's in the background. He's in the little angels that come along and do little bits. He's in the callings that don't make sense, and yet they do in the long run. It's in all of those things.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Love you guys.
Bye.
Bye.